actually a fortune to be here. As Abha said, I was here in MIT talking about another struggle a couple of years back, and so when I was in jail last year, I didn't think that I would be able to come and talk about other struggles in India with hope, with optimism. But I am here, so thanks for everyone. So there was a lot of support for me and for my co-prisoners when we were in jail, and a lot of it was from Boston and Cambridge. So a lot of people from here spoke out in support, signed statements. So I would like to thank everyone for that. Maybe it's because of you all that I am here. What I'm going to talk about today is something very different from what I spoke about 2 years back. If some of you were there, I spoke about a large uprising of people in very rural India, deep in the villages of India. And that is what has basically drawn our attention in India. India is a predominantly rural country. And that has drawn our attention of the world, even attention of activists and organizations in India has mostly been focused on the struggles and the movements in exploitation and deprivation in the rural areas of India. And there is extreme exploitation and deprivation in rural areas of India, which is connected in various ways with the Indian economy, with the world economy, with the various injustices inherent in Indian society, such as caste, gender, etc. So that is an issue which has drawn our attention. But parallel to that, and also closely interconnected to that, India has also seen a major change and major upheavals in the urban scenario. Okay, and that is something which has not drawn so much attention on one hand, and it has also not really focused the energy of many activists and organizations in India, because the rural struggles, the rural movements take so much of our efforts and energies. Okay, so I will talk about the urban battleground because we are in India, we are very concerned about what is happening in the urban areas. On one hand, because it involves the lives and livelihoods of large numbers of people, okay, huge numbers. Indian cities are huge. The city which I come from, Kolkata, is a city of around 14 million people, okay, and there are cities like Mumbai and Delhi which have equal numbers of people. So it's a major concern. On the other hand, it is also closely connected with the dynamics of economics, politics in the villages and also worldwide. So Indian, just as like the Alliance for a Democratic and Secular South Asia over here has its varied concern, and its concern has evolved to involve things like communalism, democracy, equity, justice, etc. The cities in India, in a microcosm, reflect all these concerns, right, involving the lives and livelihoods of millions of people. And that is what I'm going to talk about, and I'll try to sort of set it in the background of a broader political economy in the world, and then talk about some specific struggles and movements in which I have been involved, and which has sort of given me the training and experience in this urban battleground to become an urban fighter, quote unquote, which generally ends up in jail. So what basically the Indian cities, if you go to any of the large cities like Mumbai, for example, or Kolkata, they look something like this. Okay, so this is a picture which I have taken from some high-rise building. Okay, looking over the slum in Mumbai, which is reputedly the largest slum in the world, is called Dharavi. Okay, and behind it you see all the skyscrapers, the high-rises in Mumbai. And Mumbai, the per square feet land value is one of the highest in the world. Okay, it's the same as that is in Tokyo and New York apparently. Okay, so here in the cities of the developing world, be it Mumbai, be it Kolkata, be it Sao Paulo, or be it like Shanghai, you would see this huge high-rises, skyscrapers, flyovers representing the wealth, and this double-figure GDP growth rates of these countries, very close or just beside the slums. Okay, And the juxtaposition of these high rises and the people who live in them and the slums and their dwellers is not just geographical. There is very close, economic, social, connections between these two worlds, and they are two completely different worlds. And these are two worlds which are in conflict most of the time, because the resources in the urban areas, okay, they are limiting, and both these groups, the working class who lives in the slums, okay, and the haves and the upwardly mobile professional class which lives in the high rises and in the nice suburbs, they are all contending for what I call the right to the city, okay, and the right to the city, okay, basically means a right to a proper and dignified livelihood in the city, okay, a right to live in the city. That is I think the first right, to be able to live in the city, the right to the amenities of the city, okay, and the right to to pursue your livelihood, your profession in the city. So all this encompasses the right to the city, and this is in contention because of the pressure which has been building up in the cities, because of the way the economic policies have shifted over the last 30 years or so, and that is reflected somehow in these figures which I want to show. This shows the changes in employment pattern and sector-wise changes in GDP in various sectors in India. So from 1983 to 2010, you would see there has been a large decline, okay, like a 15% decline in the percentage of the population involved in agriculture. Okay, this has been a major reason why people have shifted from agriculture, okay, in the villages to the cities, right? So if you go to any Indian village today, especially in the parts of like eastern India or central India, or even parts of northern India where I live, you will see that the defining feature is out migration. People, farmers, people who used to work on the farms, landless workers we used to call them, they're all out migrating to the cities, right? This is because of the pressure which has taken place on agriculture over the last 20 years or so. So from 1991, the Indian government adopted a clearly neoliberal economic policy decision or direction, which is marked by reducing public investment in agriculture. Okay, so all public investment in the agricultural field, such as marketing of agricultural products, giving cheap credit to farmers, because farmers generally have to take credit in order to buy seeds, fertilizers, machinery, etc. Investment in agriculture, etc. have all been reduced, have all been cut down, because the government thought that, or the policy decision which has been advised by the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, okay, which basically runs on the dictates of the US government and other governments of the imperialist countries. Their diktat has been so the government should move out of agriculture, so that finally agriculture can be corporatized. Okay, so the result has been that agriculture, and together with this, the result of the Green Revolution which has happened in India in the 1970s and 80s, which involved use of large amounts of fertilizers, pesticides, high yielding variety of seeds, intensive irrigation from groundwater, etc., has depleted the condition of both the soil and the water in India, such that agricultural productivity was itself reducing. So these two things together, on one hand, the natural limits of agricultural sustainability being reached, okay, on the other hand, reduction of public investment in agriculture, these two things resulted in a complete crisis in agriculture. Okay, and this crisis set up like sort of in the middle of the 1990s, and this has been marked most starkly by the huge number of farmer suicides in India. Means the number of farmer suicides in India has been described as the largest suicide epidemic in the world history. Over the last decade or so, 250,000 farmers have committed suicide. It has never happened in Indian history before, even during times of famine and all. So there is this rural distress which has set in. Okay, apparently the rural productivity has gone up in the last 4 or 5 years, but that's for different reasons. The reason what has happened is that there has been some corporatization in agriculture, and that has increased productivity. It's not because that the farmers have regained their old productivity or they have got back their old returns. Okay, so this set of farmers, on one hand small peasants. So in India has been classically a country of small land holdings, okay, very small actually, less than an acre. So people are in sort of just on the borderline of economic catastrophe. So whenever this sort of rural indebtedness, reduction in government support, etc. has happened, these people have lost everything. They have been forced to sell away their lands, or people who were getting employment in other lands, they have been forced to out-migrate from the villages and come to the cities in search of livelihood. So this is something which has happened hand in hand. So the working class, the rural working class has been displaced from the villages to the cities, where they have sort of added on to this large mass of the urban working class which was already there. So this has been one scenario. On the other hand, you would see that industry nearly has remained, constant over from 1983 to 2010. This is one of the secrets of India's development. Okay, you have had double-digit, growth, or like single digits, high percentage of growth over the last decade or so, with no increase in industrial employment. All right, so this just shows how financialization of the economy, okay, and neoliberal development, what it can do. Basically, there's been no industrialization here. Two sectors only shows growth. Okay, now one is construction, where there's been tremendous growth. Okay, from 2.2% of the population in 1983 to 12% of the population in 2010. Okay, and the other is the services sector. All right, services means everything, include things like like sweeping the streets to working as domestic help in houses, etc. So, and both of this you can understand are localized in the cities. Both these sectors. So the only two sectors in India which have shown any increase in employment are localized in the cities. Alright? And both of the sectors are come under what we call in India as unorganized sectors, the informal sectors. Here, the actual number of people who are working, we do not know. They do not have any formal employment, they do not have any regularity of employment, okay? So they do not have any benefits, etc. You are just living on a day-to-day or daily wage sort of employment. Construction workers in India are still not unionized. Okay, there are no unions of construction workers as such, except some small left parties that tried to form some unions. So this large number of people who have sort of come and converged in the Indian cities over the last 2 decades or so are living in a very precarious existence. Okay, because they do not have any sort of certainty of employment. They are part of the unorganized sector. Okay, they have been uprooted from their villages, and then they have come and settled down in this huge slums, okay, which have grown up in the cities. And this is the case, I think, in the entire all the cities of India, especially the big cities. So this is now, when these people are now in the cities, then the contention, now the battle starts over the city itself. So these people have been uprooted from the villages, and they have come and taken shelter in the cities in their small slums, etc. And they are an integral part of the city's economy, because they are providing all the services on which the city is dependent. They are building those huge high-rises which you can see, which are present in the cities. Okay, but now the cities, the elite in the cities, okay, the developers, what we call them promoters, they actually need that land in order to develop. So it gives rise to a vicious cycle. So these people are coming from the villages, settling down on land of the cities, with the land which is at premium, the land which the developers themselves want. Okay, and therefore these people need to be uprooted again from that land. Okay, so they get uprooted again and again from slums. And basically what happens now, the city spreads outwards, and all around the city you would now get a belt of slums growing like that. And as the city is expanding, these people are being pushed out from their houses repeatedly, and then they're going to the more and more periphery. So it's both a geographical periphery and also a real periphery of livelihood, a periphery of the life of the city, where these people are living and for the last 2 decades. And this is a large percentage of the population of India now, maybe like 30% of the population of India now. Therefore, the struggles over resources of the city, mainly land, is becoming acute, and it is getting reflected on one hand in these evictions of inhabitants of slums and their resistance to it. On the other hand, it is also being reflected in the increasing militancy of the workers protests, workers' resistance in India, which is also something which we really don't get to know. So I will talk a little bit about some of these evictions, the struggle against being evicted from the homes, and also a little bit about the struggles of workers, specifically workers of one of the major industries in India, which is an automobile production industry called Maruti Suzuki, which is owned by a Japanese multinational. So the other thing which also shows how the economy has developed is that it shows the percentage contribution of various sectors to the GDP, okay, to the gross domestic product. And here you see that agriculture, with around 50% of population, only contributes to 17% to the GDP, whereas that the services sector contributes around 56%. So it is also a very sort of paradoxical and a stark difference which you see. Therefore, there's all these people who are laboring in the cities, and then more and more people are, because it's the only productive sector now. And therefore it is attracting more and more people to come and settle down in the cities, and that is the major growing sector in the entire economy, and therefore this battle is happening around these economic issues. So interestingly, this struggle over the cities is also very much closely connected to a process of de-industrialization. De-industrialization is something which you are familiar over here. This entire, I used to live and work in Cleveland, which is in this northern part of the Midwest. The entire belt from Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Detroit, Gary, Flint, etc. The entire areas have been de-industrialized systematically over the last 30 years because industries have been removed and has gone offshore, as they call it. Okay. This has been a problem in India also, something which has really not been looked at. And as usual, in India, this process of deindustrialization has been sort of attributed to labor militancy. Okay, but that is not the case. So I come from a state where apparently the labor force is so militant that all the industries left, and there was what is called as capital flight. But if you look at the history of this industries closing down, you would see that most means around 80% of them were done by the owner of the industry themselves, in order to just find sources of greater profit or less tax. So they would just shift the industry to a place where the taxation was less. And this process of deindustrialization was the first battleground in the city. Okay, so there were huge industries in the city, and this huge high-rises which I show over here are a specific complex, a housing complex in Calcutta, where the city where I come from. It is called the South City. And when I returned from here, this was the first struggle I got involved in. Okay, so this was a place where there was a large industry employing around 4,000 people. It was an industry producing electrical goods, like sewing machines, fans, of which there is a huge demand in India. Okay, because these are still used. And then in the middle of the 1990s, this company, they said that we do not have enough profits, we cannot run the industry, so we want to close it down. Okay, so they declared the industry what we call in India as sick. That means we cannot run the industry anymore. Then the government comes out with a bailout scheme, and the government says that you can use your assets, okay, in order to get some capital and reinvest in your industry, enhance your technology, and then in that way you increase your production, and therefore go back to a sort of a workable mode. And what was the main asset they had? The main asset was land. Okay, so because they were in the middle of a city. So what they did was that they first sold off a part of the land which was not being used as the factory land. Okay, this was adjoining the factory. Then they forced the government to basically change the law. So actually in India, a company cannot, all this industrial land is held on leasehold. It's not actually owned by the company, and therefore the company cannot really sell it. So they made the government of my state change a law such that the government can take back that land, okay, from the leasehold land, and resell it back to the industry, the company, on a token price of just like 1 rupee in India, and then the company can do anything with the land. So the company sold away the entire land, and instead of reinvesting that money in the factory or in the production, they just invested in the stock market. Okay, and all these 4,000 people who were working in the factory, they were just fired, right? And it is on that land this huge high-rise came up pretty soon, together with a huge shopping mall. So this was one of the pictures of deindustrialization which happened in India, and this is a sort of the prototype for what has happened all over India. So this has started happening much before this crisis of agriculture happened, and this has really nearly gone. It has only been studied by some academics, although there were huge struggles surrounding this thing. This thing was in 2008, and this was interesting. With this sort of held on because of one worker called Shambhu Singh. So he was a worker in this factory, and he refused to move away from there. Okay. So he had, basically he used to live in his quarters, which you see over here, this small house over there, and they were not officially fired because the company couldn't officially fire any of the workers, because the agreement with the government was that they would actually reinvest the money in the company and they would retain all the workers. So they couldn't officially fire anyone. So he said that as long as I am not fired, they cannot move me out of my living quarters also. Okay, so he stayed on in that small quarters, and they started breaking down each of the other quarters except that single thing, because he filed a case against it. And then they started building those high rises around him. So it was a surreal atmosphere. You see this one single family staying in the middle of this ground, and this huge high rises coming up all around it. And I saw that plan. The swimming pool was bang in the place where his quarter was. So they had to, in order to build the swimming pool, they had to remove him. Okay. So in 2008, on 24th December night, Christmas Eve, they sent in like local criminals into his house, and they basically beat up his, I think his brother's wife, and a little kid was there at home. They tied them and they threw them out on the streets with their furniture and all. So on 25th December, Christmas Day, when everyone was celebrating Christmas, we came to know about it, and we converged in that area and put all the furniture back in. Okay, and then we said that we will not move away from the area. So this gave rise to a year-long struggle against this huge company. So they had all the government support. They tried to beat him up, and they tried to beat us up. All this thing happened. There were protests in the city, but they couldn't move. Then sort of various things happened, and what finally happened was that 2010 January, one day, one morning, so because he lost his job, he was driving I think a truck or something. He was crossing the road somewhere, some highway, and he was run over by a vehicle, and he died in this. And we still don't know whether it was an accident or whether he was really, removed. And because all the struggle was around him, because he was the only person who had claim to their ground, we could not sustain that struggle. Okay, so this quarter was demolished and this land was taken over. So this was my first taste of this urban battle which was being waged, and which has started off with this process of de-industrialization. Okay, when industries which were actually working well, which were making profit, were closed down, and they were replaced by this real estate, like this buildings. So this process is happening all over India. Another big example is basically the textile mills of Mumbai, Bombay and Ahmedabad. Okay, these were two cities in Western India with a huge number of textile mills. This is the National Textile Corporation mill in Mumbai. So these were huge, textile mills employing large number of people. And over a period of 20 years, starting from the 1980s, these were systematically closed down. And this not only caused huge amount of unemployment. This actually was also one of the starting points of the communal, politics, in the cities of Bombay and Ahmedabad. The reason was that in this city, in Mumbai, and a semi-fascist organization called the Shiv Sena, okay, it was basically nurtured and encouraged by the mill owners to actually beat up and destroy the unions who were resisting the closing down of this factories. So there were very strong, trade union movements among the workers of these factories, and they were led by, on one hand, by some of the established communist parties. So one of the representatives of the elected representatives of the CPI, the Communist Party of India, Krishna Desai, was actually murdered by goons of the Shiv Sena on one hand. On the other hand, there were also another trade union leader, Datta Samant, who was leading another trade union movement. So this was systematically destroyed, and this gave a foothold to this fascist. This is a Hindu, like a fundamentalist party, to gain their ground in Mumbai, and now they sort of nearly rule the city. Same sort of thing happened in Ahmedabad, which is a city in Gujarat, where this sort of deindustrialization caused such huge unemployment and huge dislocation in the population that it has given rise to communal tensions in the cities, and which has finally sort of added on to the anti-Muslim riots or anti-Muslim genocide which happened in 2002 in Ahmedabad and other cities in Gujarat. So it has been said by sociologists and activists that this deindustrialization, closing down of the settlements, played a very important role in the development of this communal tension in cities such as Ahmedabad, Surat, etc. Because factories are a place. This is also I have also experienced working with trade unions, etc. Factories are places where workers from different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different religions, they work together. Okay, they have common interests to fight for, and then this sort of communal tensions, communal differences or ethnic differences are actually subdued because of common interests, common struggles. And this is an experience which I have of first hand in this way. I mean, interestingly, this person, this is an interesting anecdote. Shambhu Singh, he was a poor worker in the city, but he is from a high caste of India, from rural Bihar, which is a very backward state. And he told me that in his village, he is sort of in the highest caste position, and everyone would sort of give him that, the backward caste, the lower caste would give him the respect which is normally in the city. So people apparently, when they would be riding like bikes, when they would be crossing the homes of high caste people, they would have to get down from the bikes. But he, because of his, this involvement in the struggles, worker struggles in the city, went back and became a very important anti-caste campaigner in his village, and he could actually stop this caste practices in his village. So this sort of effects of this urban struggles has on people on things like caste issues also, which is reflected in the villages. So this was the process of deindustrialization which happened. So pretty much what happened by the middle of the end of the 1990s, beginning of this century, most of the land, the industrial land in the cities has been occupied and has been converted into real estate. So if you go to the cities in India now, you would see these huge high rises, glittering shopping malls. I can vouch that everyone has a story of this sort of deindustrialization, closing down of factories behind them, each and every one. Means that is basically what has happened in India over the last 2 decades. But then what happened was that once the industrial land was occupied, then the target became the land on which people were living. Okay, and then therefore the slums on which firstly workers were staying, and secondly all these uprooted people from the villages who had been uprooted from the livelihoods in agriculture had come and started settling. That became the next target. Okay, so slums in India are sort of communities. Okay, it is not just like places where people just live. It might look very dirty, it might look unhygienic, etc. But they're communities where people live, where people work. Okay, where people send their kids to school. When I work with slum eviction evicted people, when I ask them that what is your first concern, it's very surprising. It was surprising for me. The first concern they tell me are the children of the school, the schools of the children, because they might have put their children in some schools nearby, and if they are now evicted and they have to shift like 20 miles away from there, how would the children go to school? So that becomes their first concern. Okay, and they cannot take the children to school, because if they do that, they are daily wage earners. They are going to lose that day's wage. So these are the type of concerns which happens. So what happened was that during this time, the neoliberal policies, which also looked at trying to reconstruct the cities, okay, in the model of the cities of the developed world of the West, brought in this idea of urban renewal, okay, or urban revival. All right. So, and I think the formula for urban revival, and it is ironic. The word revive means to bring back to life. The word viva comes from the Latin, life, was to remove the lives of people who are sitting or staying in the city outside the city. So that basically involved urban revival, okay, to shift these people out of the city. And basically there were government schemes which came up, and the most important of them with the most amount of funding, actually the funding comes from 2 banks. It comes from the Asian Development Bank, which is a large multinational bank based in Japan, and the World Bank, which is based in the US. And they have started something called as the Jawaharlal Nehru Urban Renewal Mission, named after the first Prime Minister of India. And the agenda is in the name of beautification, okay, that is number 1, and renewal and reshaping of cities, okay. But basically underlying all this is again the same class struggle, which was exemplified by this struggle between the workers and the owners of industries. So this class struggle is reflected in this sort of slum demolition, and this is this slum which was demolished in Kolkata called Gunadanga, where I was involved. My involvement came over here sort of by, this is very close to my home, it is like 1.5 miles from my home, and this was a site, you see those apartment behind it, these are basically public housing which the government has built. So basically this urban renewal mission, their scheme is that from the city, when they remove people, okay, when they are evicting these people, they are supposed to build these houses for them. Okay, these are horrible houses. Basically, it means this is just like a single room of 116 square feet where entire families are put in. Okay, so 3 generations. India has joint families where you have 3 generations living together. They are all put into the 116 square feet. Okay, so you should imagine that. The worst part is that people can at least accept that. The worst part is that there are no schools, no health services, no public water supply, etc. in these areas. So when I went back, I and a few other people had started a school over here basically. It was a small school built in a sort of temporary shelter for the children of the people who were living in these apartments. And then there was this ground in front where other people who were being evicted, okay, from other slums were coming and just staying there in temporary shelter. They are waiting to be allotted such apartments. Alright? Now what happened, because of this economic crisis which is happening everywhere, the public, the agency which was responsible for building these houses, apparently they lost or their funding was cut down. Okay? And they adopted a model which is now the favorite model of the state in India, which is called as the PPP, the public-private partnership model. Okay? So the PPP basically means that some public resource, okay, a private company would build, okay, and it would be allowed to use it commercially, okay, and that would also, part of it would serve the public purpose, okay. But in reality, it actually means, PPP means it is private profit at public expense. Okay, it is nothing but a profit-making scheme for private entities using public resources. Okay, so here the PPP. So what happened? This company, this agency, which was responsible for building these flats, they went into a PPP scheme where they said that this land which is in front of this would be handed over to a developer, a private developer, who would use it for commercial purposes. They found out from the department, from some friends in the department, it would be used for building a shopping mall, okay, and an amusement center, God knows to amuse whom, and a part of it would be allocated for housing, making these houses. All right. So what happened? This was like last year, 29th March. They came in with bulldozers and they just broke down this entire slum. They send all these people who are living over there, and they do it very systematically. Now you see, they break it down, and what they have started doing, so that people cannot, so that they cannot take building materials and started rebuilding the slums. They add fire, they put it on fire, and they say there was some accidental fire has happened. Something has happened, so they accidentally caught fire. But they deliberately, they put it on fire so that you cannot even recover building material. But here, what happened? The people resisted. Okay, because we were already involved over here, other people came around immediately. So within a day, there was a decision that the people wouldn't move out of that area. And I think this is a crucial decision whenever such evictions take place. Whatever is happening, do not leave the ground, because your fight is on that land. You have to hold on to the land. So people basically held on to the land, and whatever building material we could salvage, so like this bamboo sticks and all, and people started building their houses again with that. And then contributions poured in. We sort of went out on a drive in the city, just collecting things like tarpaulin sheets, etc., by which this thing happened. And this gave rise to the movement, okay, the Gunadanga movement, where people resisted. Alright, and then the police came in. The police was sent in to remove them. So this was basically an eviction resistance committee was held. There was meetings, etc., which was happened. There were rallies. There were hunger strike. Okay, there were political organizations. Alright, these are radical left organizations which came in and participated in the movement. And there was police. They came, and everywhere it was the women who took the forefront again. This sort of coincided with my experience in the villages of India, where also in the forefront there were women. Here also the women of this slum took the leading role in the struggle, because their lives are the most affected. Most of them work as domestic helps in people's houses. Okay, and most of them lost their jobs during this period because they couldn't go to their work for days. But even then they fought, and they could, and we were arrested, and all that also contributed to it because that created a lot of public attention. All right. As a result of this, what happened was that these people are still on the ground. Okay. What the state has done is basically they have built a 7-foot tall wall around this entire area, and it has like barbed wire on it. Okay, and outside it is written. So outside it is written that basic services for the urban poor. This is the name of the scheme. Inside, these people are there. Apparently, the wall has been built to prevent encroachers from coming in. Okay, but actually the people are walled inside. Okay, but they have stayed on. And this is the first case in the last 30 years where people who have been evicted from a slum has been able to retain their position, has been able to rebuild their houses over there. And since then, in the last 2 years, the government of my state hasn't had the guts to demolish a single more slum. Okay, so this is a place where it has been sort of, we have been able to check them at a large cost. But we see contrast also. This is a slum in Bangalore. Bangalore is the sort of, you might have heard of it, this is the Silicon Valley of India. This is where all the IT industry, which is that services sector, which contributes to a huge amount of the GDP, is localized. And there are like, millions of people who have gone and converged in Bangalore. Bangalore now has even higher land value than Bombay, okay, than Mumbai. So Bangalore, this slum, Ejipura, this history goes back 20 years. Okay, I was a graduate student in Bangalore, and I have stayed there for 6 years when I was there. This thing started at that time, and this is an even more sordid story. So basically, these were people who were evicted during a large international game. Okay, whenever there are international games in India or any other country like Brazil, etc., it is a big, sort of hype. But poor people always, like thank heavens if they survive that game, if their houses survive that game, because they are just thrown out of the cities in order to, give a sort of a nice, picture of the cities. So these people were originally evicted from their homes in order to build stadium from a large game, and then they were supposed to be, this is a huge 10,000 people. They were supposed to be housed in this public housing. So, and 19 public housing, such apartments was supposed to be built. So 11 were built, and this 10,000 people went into that. But within 5 years, these buildings developed cracks, and in 2000, 5 of these buildings collapsed. Okay, and 48 people died. This was the time when I was there in the city. Then what happened? Everyone was brought out from these places, and the government built them like tin sheds. And they stayed there, and the government said, and there was a court judgment which said that the government has to rebuild all of this building. Okay, this was in 1999. Okay, till 2011, nothing happened. These people stayed on in those tin sheds. Okay, and the government, they put out a tender asking for like bids from companies who would build this housing, and there was for 11 years that process went on. Okay, so in 2011, the court again gave a judgment that it has to be done immediately, and now the government went into a PPP mode. Okay, and because now the PPP was in vogue, they gave this land to a company which has already built a huge shopping mall in another part of Bangalore, and they would use like 2/3 of the land for again building a shopping mall and 1/3 for housing these people. So this was the place when again this thing they sent in bulldozers to evict these people from the tin sheds, and there was again the same scenes. You would see police coming in, and the struggle happened. But here the problem was that, and this is the lesson which we learned in this 11 years which has elapsed over this period, and most of these people are again like poor daily wage earners. Okay, they are mostly from the lowest caste, like we call them Dalits, etc. Dalits. So in this place they have got dispersed over this 11 years, because 11 years in a place without proper livelihood had made them that sort of that community feeling which was there in Noradanga go down. So when this eviction happened, okay, this was again like this was early this year, people actually tried to stay on, but then there were no sort of organized force which could really sustain the struggle. There was no which could really sustain the struggle, and some of the leaders of this community over there, they were bribed, and they basically moved out, and following them, the rest of the people also moved out. So there are still some people who are lying around, who are staying around this area, but most of these people have moved out, and now this company is apparently started to build this mall, although there are some other problems which has come up. So these are two contrasting pictures of what happens in these urban struggles. Places where you can stay on and you can resist, but it requires various strategies, you know. Number one is that you require some examples who would stay on, okay, and who would actually at some cost to themselves would resist, would decide not to go, would claim their right to the city. On the other hand, you have to build a broader solidarity among the urban population. We have to build this sense among the urban population, among the middle class, which is in the cities, that this is something which also closely connects them. Okay, so that we could achieve in Calcutta. This sort of larger solidarity could be achieved. So, and that also takes various strategies. For example, whenever this sort of thing, when the government comes up with committees which gives recommendations for this urban renewal or beautification, etc., what we have done, we immediately set up rival committees, of academics, activists, engineers, etc., who would come up with just the opposite recommendation. So this sort of muddies the waters. Alright, the government now has to answer questions, because these are people with some eminence in society, and immediately as the government is saying something, they are saying immediately the opposite things. Okay, and that creates this sort of this conflict in the city, which makes the government, the states work harder. So these are strategies, I think, which we should keep in mind, because there are similar things happening all over the world. Housing is a problem in this country also. I was in Columbus a week back, where we had a similar meeting on such a public housing in Columbus, which is when the people have been evicted, and our experiences are same. I understand is that the entire world is seeing the struggle. The struggle is over this neoliberal capitalism, which is trying to basically destroy the livelihoods of a large section of the population in order to enhance or maximize the profits of a very small section, and therefore this struggle is going to get more accentuated. And we understand the commonalities of interest which ties the struggles in the cities with that in the villages, because you can understand most of the people who are in the cities are basically in the villages, and therefore the political organizations are trying to organize in India also, the working class, they are also trying to develop the understanding that there has to be this interlinking between the villages and the cities, and also of people in every country of the world, so that we can fight this struggle together. With this, I think I will end, and I will be happy to answer questions.
Point, I would also like to welcome a few people in our audience. Dorothea Manuela is the chair of the Boston May Day Committee, and closely works with Mass Global Action. She's herself being very much involved in the right to the city here in Boston, and perhaps we could hear very briefly how your struggles here, work. And we also have with us, I believe, Lisette Lee and Lawrence Louis. And Lisette Lee. So Lawrence works in Chinatown, and would be happy to talk about the struggles here. So if both of you can come here and very briefly tell us about your struggles, then we could take questions together, because I think there may be connections.
Hi, I'm really not prepared to make a presentation about all the struggles that I'm involved in, but I did want to come and share my solidarity with the struggles in India, because we share the brutal, the same brutal effects of colonization. I'm Puerto Riqueña, and as you know, Puerto Rico is a colony, a territory, some people call it a commonwealth of the United States, and I'm here to tell you that it's a colony, and the only purpose that it serves for the United States government is the military and cheap labor. A citizenship was forced on us, and I say that our paper, the citizenship paper says, I read it as saying cheap labor, because that was really the fact, and that's how it is that Puerto Ricans arrived mainly in New York, and then spread out throughout the United States and here. But I was watching the PowerPoint, and thank you, very much, because it reminds me again of my roots. I saw some of the slums that are very similar to the ones in Puerto Rico. There's one called La Perla, which is called the Pearl, which was not the last PowerPoint from, so I wrote it down. You just have to be with me a little bit. And it makes me a little bit emotional because the story that I just listened to, this set of facts, was repeated over and over again. So this is a global issue. So we're trying to reorganize locally, but are really thinking global. And the big goal is to try to unite all the struggles, the working class struggles, the struggles of the landless, the poor, the marginalized. And some of those stories are repeated here. The Perla is a very, very poor shanty town that's right next, if you go to Puerto Rico, you go right to San Juan, which is a big tourist area where they show you the cute little houses that the Spaniards, the colonizers built, the pretty little pastel colors. And never do you hear the story of the real brutalization of the people, the indigenous people of Puerto Rico, which haven't existed, for centuries. But the Africans are there. The African descent people are there, and we still are in the same situation. We were in a worse situation than we were before because we were an agrarian society. Industrialization came to Puerto Rico with lots of promises of jobs, and what really was ¿cómo se dice? Corporate capitalism is what was going on, because corporations from the US and other parts of the world, in Europe, are invited to come and build the empires there, and for 20 years they don't have to pay taxes. Okay, so Puerto Rico is part of the United States, so that means that they're not, really building our economy there. Literacy, it's 2013, people are still not able to fill out an application. The education there is poorer than here. Our rights, if you can call them rights, don't exist. We have a constitution, but it's the Congress of the United States that actually rules in Puerto Rico. So if anybody travels there that's a citizen of the United States and anything happens, you will see what the differences are, because we don't have the same rights. Right here in Columbia Point, we talk about taking back the city. Columbia Point had one of the largest public housing. The partnership that you addressed, the private partnership with the city happened, and they promised the residents, I don't know if some of you recall that struggle, we were part of it, promising that they were just going to build, because it was built on a landfill. So, there was a lot of health issues, asthma and other illnesses. And so they used that to their benefit. And they, the ones I'm talking about, again, is, corporate capitalism. And that they were going to rebuild, and that they were going to come back. They were going to bring them back to these nice, better built. Now the housing that they tore down no longer exists. People were displaced, and they were pushed out to the suburbs. And this is the game that's played here in in Boston and New York City and other big urban centers, is to push the poor people out, displace them to the suburbs. The wealthy come back, because something always happens as a catalyst that brings them back to somewhere more convenient. When they're done here, they move back out to the suburbs and displace the people. But what happened in Columbia Point is now it's called, I can't remember the name, I'm sorry. But it's a very, very, very nice name. Do you remember the name? It's something Bay Towers. So they have guards. They have, it's like a gated community, but now you don't see the gates, they're invisible. And the people that came back, never happened. There had to be all kinds of demonstrations and fight on and pushback. So people all over the globe are starting to rise up, whether it began 30 years ago, or it just started yesterday. People are starting to rise up to take back the cities, because we built these cities with our sweat, our blood, And then the cities are taken away from us and we're displaced. And that's the story of capitalism versus the working class and the poor. But going back to Columbia Point, this is not a new story. So after many legal actions and demonstrations and more demonstrations and more demonstrations, they allowed 6 units, only 6 units. And included in those units, you know, because they were doing us a favor, right? Because they said, we're going to allocate housing to the poor. 6 units, and in the 6 units included disabled, elderly, and the most neediest of families with all kinds of restrictions. And it was like an apartheid because certain people young people could not come to visit. They had to have judge papers from the judge signing saying that they were going to be there during these hours, like, you know, como se dice, sun up to sunset, you know, like apartheid. In Puerto Rico, the same thing. The people fought back the Navy in Vieques. I know that that's a very well known, so I bring that up because, but before the Navy was in Vieques, they were in Culebra. And the people were a lot more militant and a lot more prepared to fight back. And it was at a time that it would have been a bad mark on the United States. So they pushed them to Vieques. People were very, you know, people here did a lot of solidarity work and brought it back. You know, pushed them out, but we have the same damages that everybody else has, like in the Philippines, anywhere that military bases leave. You know, we survived from marine life poisoned. Many people have died. Children are being born at the form as a result, and it goes on and it continues. And here, and the last thing that I just want to point out, just a couple of more things. Just this one point that I think everybody's aware of. Occupy Boston began its movement here in Boston in 2011, and a couple of days after, there was a big, but I mean a major demonstration. The theme was Take Back the City. And the wonderful thing about it was that there were labor union members, there were workers unemployed in different communities. I don't usually see them, and we ended up at the front of the Bank of America, is it? A Bank of America, the Bank of Boston. To me, they're all the same people, the same buildings. And there were some demonstrations, and there were people that refused to leave. So for me, this makes me feel very, I'm gonna say, inspired to actually witness the struggle of another peoples that are far away, but right here, that we're all, you know, related. We're all related in the struggle, and we'll have the same common enemy, and that's corporate capitalism and imperialism. And I'm going to leave you with one question. We're always being asked, why do we come here? Why do immigrants come here? Right? Well, we know the answer. But what I would like to do is ask the imperialists and the capitalists why they come to our countries and destroy. We know the reason, but we're all moving for the same reason, supposedly. So I'm looking forward to the day, and even if I'm not here physically, my spirit is going to be here to see that day that we unite across the globe, all the struggles, liberation, that we have the liberation that we're entitled to, and that we can go wherever we want without borders, and that comes from all power to the people. Thank you.
I'm going to be real brief. Yeah, I'm going to be very brief. My name is Lawrence. I work as a youth coordinator at the Chinese Progressive Association. Yeah, I see a lot of striking similarities to kind of what's going on in Boston. The PPP in India, we call it the BRA here, the Boston Redevelopment Authority. It's a mix of, like, you know, private, public entities where planning and development are actually linked, right, in the same entity, and it's not right. And, you know, I think real briefly, I'm going to talk a little bit about just Chinatown and kind of what we've been doing, and also around the city. So, you know, I think the BRA and the city and a lot of these other establishments, right, similarly to what's happening in all these communities in India, I think it's happening in communities here. I think the severity might be a little bit different, what it looks like might be a little bit different, but I'm sorry, what was your name? As you mentioned, right, I think, you know, we're seeing this all across the city, and Chinatown is surrounded, right, surrounded by downtown, the South End, South Boston, right, all these places that are trying to come in, right, and as the rich folks are trying to move in, you know, I think the question of, like, who has the right to the city, right, is coming up. And community benefits, right, linkage money, these things that, like, the developers are saying, okay, here, like, we're going to build this luxury high-rise, you get 15% affordable housing that's based on the median income of the city, right? Or that zip code, which is much higher than what is actually affordable. But what's happening is, that's what we're being given, right? That's what we're being given. But I think what we're saying now, and what a lot of these, the unemployed, the tenants, the evicted, what they're saying is that's not enough, right? And so I do want to do just a quick plug. In Chinatown, we last week we did a thing called Tour Our Chinatown, where we went to different sites, right? We did a tour of Chinatown where there's different sites of kind of what we're being faced with, right? The outcome and the result of what's going on globally, but also locally. We did a tour to kind of show folks like what types of development, right? Because right now Chinatown, there's over 2,000 luxury units prepared to be built, confirmed, right? There's land for it and it's going to be built in ratio to less than 200, right? 4,000 to 200, right? Of affordable units, right? So that's not okay. And so there's a movement across the city called Right to the City. There's a coalition where there's groups from East Boston, there's groups from Dorchester, Roxbury, Chinatown. All these different groups are coming together to say that this is our city, right? And Take Back the City was one of the big actions that was probably one of my favorite rallies that I've ever been to. And so tomorrow, actually, in East Boston, we're doing a second installment of tour different communities to learn. So I'm inspired to see people here on a Friday night. I know people probably got things to do afterwards, but I'm inspired, and it'd be great to see some of y'all faces there tomorrow in East Boston at 11 o'clock. Just find me after the questioning part of this, and I can give you more details. But
You could write it here if you would like.
Awesome. That'd be great.
Partho, please come back and take questions on the thing. So you can see that, the struggle is, everywhere. Are there any questions?
Yeah. So,
In terms of a long-term strategy, are there any plans or thinking about building, like coalition in cities with the villages to stop this number one movement from villages to cities? And also, like, cities don't produce anything, so they are dependent on the villages. If some kind of a cooperatives of consumers, workers in cities and then producers in the villages, so they can bypass the market mechanism and also develop this solidarity. Is that kind of strategy being developed or not?
Yeah, there is discussion about this, because this realization is sort of dawning that these are connected. The distress in agriculture, the uprooting of the agricultural population, and the struggles in the cities. So it has been brought up. So the problem is that there is no such organized effort. This is being written about at the moment. There are political organizations, social organizations which have recognized this sort of thing and have sort of thought about solutions on the lines which you have also suggested. But I don't think there are things like, there are some very small organizations trying to do alternative forms of, exchange, like produce, and then they are taking to the cities, because there are other pressures also working, which is things which can take the entire night. For example, the huge market we were talking about. The market is one of the major means of livelihood, in the cities, and this is again a very informal market in India, where farmers, they come to the markets bringing their produce. So over the last couple of years, the government has tried, or they have actually passed the law last week, which allows the foreign direct investment, like investment by multinationals in the retail trade, which has allowed the entry of companies like Walmart, okay, who weren't allowed in India before this. So this is now going to even cause greater problems, because this large section who are sort of intermediary between the village and the cities, they would be affected because they have their own supply chains, which removes all intermediaries, basically. So therefore, there have been strategies to sort of tackle that, and I have involved in some of these things also, from this completely different perspective, from sort of resisting the entry of large retail multinationals. So I think that will contribute to the type of things what you have just suggested. So I hope that works to some extent. Yeah.
There's a question here.
More of a comment, or I guess a clarification. It seemed like what you're saying is that people are forced to the cities, as opposed to this idea of the city calling people to it. But the rural areas are being drained and the people are being forced to the cities, am I correct?
Right. Yeah, so the people are being forced to the cities from the villages because of loss of livelihood in the villages. You can understand, like India, like in 1980s, it had around 70% people engaged in agriculture, which was the main sort of livelihood. Now that increasingly coming in a crisis. The crisis as I described, resulting farmer suicides, loss of land, increased indebtedness, etc. These people are being forced to the cities because in cities people think that they will have some sort of livelihood, they will survive somehow, doing something, So that is why all these people have converged into the cities, rather than the cities calling anyone to come to them. So that is the mechanism what is going on.
I was curious, you were mentioning about some of the political parties that have been involved in these urban struggles. I was wondering if you could elaborate on maybe some of them, and particularly if there's been any Maoist involvement in any of these urban struggles.
Okay. So yeah, so the government actually sees the Maoist hand in every urban struggle. So, so even though the Maoists are nowhere there, the government always sees the Maoists. So like when we were arrested, actually I was arrested and accused being part of a demonstration. Okay, and I was in my institute, which is like 60 miles away. And in the court, the public prosecutor was just jumping up and down, telling he is the Maoist mastermind. He masterminded and that sort of thing. So the government, so there are multiple such left organizations, left political parties which are involved in all these struggles. I didn't speak about the Maruti, as I said, the worker struggle, which is also involves a coalition of left political organizations. This is not the parliamentary left. So there are left parties in India which regularly stand for elections, etc. These are not that, they are involved in people's movements. Okay, there might be in some cases the Maoists might also be involved because they also have organization, or they are trying to build organization in the cities. But whatever be the case, the state is very scared of this thing because they thought till now that the urban areas are sort of trouble free, they can do anything in the urban, because that has been their experience over the last 20 years. Either using fascist, vigilante forces or the police, they have been able to crush all urban struggles. So now whenever there is an urban struggle, be it that Maruti sort of thing, where the worker struggle, or Nonadanga, where this eviction struggle, they always say that the Maoist and radical elements are involved. So that is the scenario basically. Yeah.
Demonstrations or trying to push back is one aspect of it. But and what's difficult to find even here and anywhere is a vision of like how are people going to restructure their lives and in what way? Because it keeps on feeling like that the state and corporations, they keep on driving it the way they want it. Of course they're struggling in it, and people are struggling in it. But I could see them they continue doing this. The development that they want is going on. So something is missing in our struggles, in which we have not been able to really articulate and really move forward, not on just one basis that we don't have housing, we don't have a lot of things. So how, where is India going to go, and where are the people going to go? What is going to happen?
Yeah.
And how are we going to organize? And on what basis?
Yeah, these are important questions, and these questions come up from within the struggle also. That is exactly, I remember when sitting on that field of Nonadanga among those demolished houses under a starry sky, I have heard this question coming from slum dwellers whose houses have been broken down. That how, because many of them have been evicted 3 times, 4 times in their lives. The houses have been demolished, they have rebuilt them somewhere else. So they have asked that, how will this cycle stop? So there are no ready-made solutions. One thing which I feel, and which might happen in a socialistic society one day, but which we can try doing from today, is more rational use of resources. Rational and equitable use of, see, in the cities the problem is a limiting amount of resources having too many stakeholders or too many sort of claimants. So rational usage of resources in the cities is very important. Means here in this country you can see there is so much waste of urban resources, in terms of water, in terms of space, in terms of greenery, so much of it. The same sort of lifestyle is trying to be sort of replicated in India. In a city like Bangalore, which is under perennial, water crisis, they are fighting with another state over the rights to water from a river. If you go to every new, housing complex, you will see there is a swimming pool, Although no one in India swims in the swimming pools, everyone takes their shower in their bathroom. But there's a swimming pool, because if you do not have a swimming pool, the property value is going to be down. So there has to be rational usage of resources. So these people have now started understanding. When the slums are being built, there is some, at least, direction towards more rational, more equitable usage of resources. If that happens, that itself is going to solve a lot of problems. Space, water, etc., which are at a premium. If that can be used rationally, it doesn't take much effort also, I think. That will solve a lot of problems. Only thing, I don't know if it will require a bloodbath to get that done or not. That's difficult to say.
I have a question. What do you think is the difference between the two struggles in Bangalore and in Kolkata? I mean, does history have to do something? What do you think is, why were people bought off in Bangalore and not in Calcutta? What happened in the intervening 11 years?
Right.
Has there been some analysis?
Yeah, I have written an article on that. Because it's still evolving, so really we haven't really been able to analyze. But I'll tell my thoughts about it a little bit. Number one is you have to be able to mobilize a broader section of the city around this thing. In Bangalore, that has not happened. So in 11 years, it has sort of gone outside of public attention. And in Bangalore, this culture of coming around a struggle which is not directly connected to one's life, it hasn't developed in this intervening period. So they couldn't sort of mobilize this broad political support, which we were sort of successful in doing in Calcutta, and which happens multiple times in that case. That is one thing. The other thing what happened, which is sort of something we have to be careful about, is that in Bangalore, the struggle was somehow portrayed as a struggle, between. So most of the people over there in that slum were Dalits, from the lower caste. So they made it a sort of a Dalit, issue, which sort of brought in identity-based, political formations into it, who then we found were very easy to buy off to some extent. So one of them in this last assembly elections was given an assembly seat, and so that sort of thing, when it happens within a movement, that creates this sort of problem. So this was the other thing. Another thing is that the public discourse. The public discourse in Bangalore has been around this, the Silicon Valley, the development, IT industry, malls, etc. So the struggle couldn't really make a space in the public discourse too. So all these things together, I think, had created an atmosphere in Bangalore where it couldn't be sustained, really. The same thing, I didn't really speak about the Maruti struggle. The same thing is happening with the Maruti. This is a large auto manufacturing company. This is the largest auto manufacturing company in India. It is owned by the Japanese. It's basically Suzuki. And their workers over there were considered to be the most privileged among Indian workers. The best paid, very educated. So all of them had passed, like what we call as, industrial training, specialized industrial training. But they finally rose up because they weren't allowed to form a union. And they wanted to form a union because the working condition in the factories were very bad. So there were Japanese, managers. They had a set of Indian managers below them, and the working conditions were really bad. And they were trying to unionize, and they were being prevented. And finally, they rose up in a very militant struggle. There was a major sort of riot in the factory. And then what the government did, that they have accused most of these workers of waging war against the state, basically like treason. And 147 workers are in jail for the last 2 years, basically. So here the problem came up because of this, and the problem also was of contractual workers. You know, most of the workers, 80% of the workers in the factory are contractual workers. Yeah. So, so basically, so this is the this is the place called Manesar, and you can see the demand. See, so the expulsion, they expelled permanent workers, and the basically custodial violence, and basically 1,500 contract workers. So contractualization of the workforce is again another thing which is going on, which is again feeding into this process. Okay, this is from a pamphlet from the movement over there. So basically, again, here what has happened, the public discourse is the Maruti is the pride of the nation, so you cannot tell anything against it. You know, so this sort of public discourse also makes it very problematic in that way. And this sort of gives you an idea of how these movements are organized. So this is not one single organization or party organizing this move. You see, there are 50 organizations' name which is written down over there. Okay, and so it is now we have to have pamphlets with this sort of thing. Okay. So I am part of an organization called Sanhati, which you can see this. Our Delhi comrades were part of it. So you'll see Sanhati Delhi written over here, and you would find more about this if you're interested in India and India's all the struggles. So we have a website which is sanhati.com. So you can look at it. It is very comprehensive about all the moves in India and its connection with the world. Question?
Okay, thanks for your talk. I wanted to know a couple of things from you. How are you locating this Maruti struggle in your urbanization story? So yes, cars, it's in an urban area, I understand that, but it's also an industrial conflict, right? Where is the, or is it just contractual workers? But that's always been the case with industrial units. You know, people from different parts of the country have come. It's an older story also. You started with a shot of Slum in Mumbai, which has existed before, let's say, neoliberal reforms. It's been there for a very long time. Urbanization, so what I'm trying to understand is your story is about urbanization in general, or do you see a spike with the neoliberal movement? So I'm just pushing, I'm not saying,
no,
I understand a lot of these things. And also a lot of the data on rural-urban migration is heavily contested. So it's broken down into various kinds of migration. It's rural. It's rural to smaller town. It's not necessarily direct rural to urban imbalance which is happening. And slums around cities have existed. But yes, I also say that today there are slums around smaller cities happening also. So, but yeah.
Yeah. So I'll start with the rural urban the migration. The data is complicated because as I said there are a lot of seasonal migration. There is seasonal means workers like rural workers, they go out from their villages when there is no work in the villages. In the harvest season or the sowing season they come back. But it is like like a source and a sink issue with various sort of stops in between. The source are the villages, the final sink are the big cities, and there are various sort of stops in between. So the final trajectory is that, okay, a village, landless worker would finally end up in a big city, making stops, trying to live in some other village, trying to do a seasonal work over there, then going to some small town, doing some small, pulling a rickshaw or something, but finally will end up as a construction worker in the city. So it is very difficult to document this entire trajectory, but the final trajectory is this. Yeah. So that is one scenario. The other thing is that what you are saying is correct. So cities have grown over the last, cities of this scale have grown over the last 300 years. And both these things have been, there has been an urban working class, there has been an urban elite. Okay. But this conflict between them, that has got accentuated over the last 20 years. That is because of the neoliberal turn, where capitalism being in a sort of crisis has tried to shift from pure production as a source of surplus extraction, a source of profit, to looking at other sources of profit, like land, like real estate development. And that is portrayed by the sort of, industry-wise employment, industry-wise, contribution to the economy. So pure production is no more a viable option for capitalism to extract its profit from. Therefore, it has to look for land, it has to look for real estate development. That is the scenario everywhere in the world. That's happened in the US also. These industries were shifted out, that land is being used for houses. So that is the thing. So it has just got accentuated over there because of neoliberalism, because of government policy, because of the more acute struggle between workers. The last question was about the Maruti thing. How do I place it? See, this contractualization of labor is itself a part of this issue. If workers are given permanent jobs with all sorts of securities, okay, they would get that right to the city. They would get that right to a dignified, secure life in the cities, which all the workers look forward to when they come to the cities. Okay, they would build a life as a successful worker. They don't want to become owners maybe of the factory. But even that is not being allowed in this context. They are being kept in this contract, hire and fire policy, no benefits, etc., where they are remaining on these margins of existence. Okay, so that's how it feeds into this entire urban struggle, which has happened. And interestingly, the workers in the Manesar plant, they have gone all around Haryana to the villages, calling for support from the villagers of Haryana. So that coalition is slowly building in Haryana. Okay, so yeah.
How does people leaving India to go work in maybe like the Gulf countries? Because I know it might not be as big of a group of people leaving, but how does that play into what we're talking about?
Yeah, so that is an interesting question. So there's a large sort of flux or like people out migrating from India to other countries. A lot of them to the Gulf countries to work as like manual like labor over there, workers, nurses, that sort of thing. That is localized to some extent. There is some specific states, and these are states where there are not many local employment opportunities, for example. So these people go over there, they live in very horrible conditions in those countries because they have no rights completely. They send back money as remittances to their families in the states. That has allowed many of the states people to sort of live, but it has also given rise to a lot of problems because these states or these areas have huge inflation, price rise, because people have money in their hand. This money which is coming as remittances from this Gulf areas, and it has created social imbalances within this area also. So this is also what is happening in certain parts of India, because of this working in outside. Many people try to come to the US also to work as laborers. Yeah.
May I have the name of the website that you cited?
Yeah, I'll just write it down here. That would be easier. It's an Indian word, so it means solidarity actually.
Oh, I can't read that.
Sanhati.
SANHATI.
Any more questions? Comments? No. Let's thank Partho.